Bibles, if you go to Luke chapter 11 for just a few moments. Luke chapter 11. On Sunday nights, I've been looking to do the series. We've been working on a series on Jonah entitled White Flag and surrendering, throwing up our white flag to allow ourselves to surrender. And we're going to complete that, but we're going to complete that on Sunday morning next week, because there are some sermons that preachers, when we develop them and we start to look at them, some of them are just, you look at that one and you say, that's a Sunday morning sermon. There are those that are Sunday night lessons. But sometimes you come across one and when you start to study it, and you know that's definitely a Sunday morning sermon. So we're going to wait and finish that next week. So as we look at this, I want you to read with me in verse 37. And we'll get the introduction here to the lesson tonight. While Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him. So he went in and he reclined at the table. The Pharisee was astonished to see that he did not first wash before dinner. The Lord said to him, "Now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. You fools! Did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But gives as alms to those that are within, and behold, everything is clean for you. But woe to you, Pharisees! For you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. For these you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Woe to you, Pharisees! For you love the best seat in the synagogues and the greetings in the marketplaces. Woe to you! For you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without even knowing it." One of the lawyers answered him, "Teacher, in saying these things, you insult us also." And he said, "Woe to you, lawyers also! For you load up people with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. Woe to you, for you build tombs of the prophets whom your fathers killed. So you are witnesses, and consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them, and you build their tombs." That's what I would call hellfire preaching that Jesus does to the Pharisees. When he looks at these Pharisees and he goes in to eat with one of these Pharisees and he doesn't wash his hands, and the Pharisee notices that very quickly. And Jesus uses that as a teachable moment to begin to talk to him about how the Pharisees have been living. You tie up for yourselves heavy burdens, but you are not willing to do anything. You're not willing to lift a finger. You are really concerned about the outside, but the inside is what's really dirty. You are guilty because you always want the best seat in the house instead of giving that up for someone else. And he's preaching to these Pharisees, and that may be where we get the majority part of our teaching today. This would be negative preaching, negative teaching. Even though it's coming from Jesus, it's coming in a hard tone, criticizing, judging, if you want to say, these people for what they're doing wrong. For what they're doing wrong. But in reality, this is just a small segment of the preaching that Jesus did. A lot of Jesus' preaching didn't have to do with the hellfire type preaching. It was more along the lines of teaching. We see Jesus more in his preaching. Really, we don't have a whole lot of recorded preaching that he did or teaching. We have a lot of actions that he did. A lot of miracles. Speaking in parables, he taught lessons to people. And I think maybe that's where we get our teaching today that we see a lot in the world from churches, is we teach that negative way. We do a lot of thou shalt nots in our teachings, in our preachings. I remember when I was a youth minister, when I was a lot younger in youth ministry, we would go through, you'd go to Marcel bookstore and you'd look through the books. And there were several books that you could pick from. But most of them, when you look through those books to try to find something to teach in a class, most of them had to deal with, well, you could open up the table of contents and it would be this: alcohol, premarital sex, drug use, suicide, dancing, rock music. And you would have a list of all these things. I would add country music in there too, by the way. You'd find a list of all these things that kids were not supposed to do. And that's typically what they heard in class. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. But in reality, those things are what we need. I'm not saying that we don't. We do need those things. But that's not really the majority part of the teaching that Jesus did. And I think it's important to know that when he does teach this, he's teaching this to the religious people, is he not? This is written. He's addressing the Pharisees. These are the religious ones of the day. I think what we see in Jesus' ministry, though, we see a lot of action. We see a lot of proactive preaching in saying, do this, go here, do that, be involved in this. And we see examples of Jesus as he would eat with the sinners, as he would meet with the tax collector and then go to eat at his house with Zacchaeus, as he would go along and do a lot of different things and be around the lepers, do some things that were uncomfortable. When he would talk with the woman who was taken in adultery, then she was brought out naked and they tried to judge her and criticize her and condemn her, and Jesus was there taking the proactive approach. Woman, where are you thine accusers? When he's with the woman at the well, he takes the proactive approach to talk about not necessarily her sins, all of them, but about what he had to offer her instead. Matt, where are you going with this? Well, while you got your Bibles open to Luke, go back a couple pages and look at Luke 10. And there's a parable, probably one of the most well-known parables that we're familiar with. Beginning in verse 25. Behold, a lawyer stood up to be put to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, It is written in the law. What is written in the law? How do you read it? He answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to them, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, Who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place where he saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and he saw him. He had compassion on him. He went in, he bound up his wounds, he poured oil and wine on him, and he set him on his own animal, and he brought him into the inn to take care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever you spend more, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be the neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, The one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, You go and do likewise. Who's the one that did the right thing? The one who showed mercy. The one who did something. The one who was active in doing something. What about the other guys? The Levite. What about the Levite and the priest? When you look at these two men, the Levite and the priest, as they went by and walked and saw the man there hurting and walked on away, what about them? I mean, were they wrong in doing that? You can nod your heads, or you can shake your heads, or you can just be indifferent to the answer. Should they have done something? Well, yes, absolutely. Those were the religious people. The Samaritan was the one that they didn't like. The Samaritan is a person that these guys that would be hearing this would be considered a half-breed, and they wouldn't want to be around that person. And when Jesus uses the Samaritan as doing the action that was perceived as good, this really hit them where it hurt, especially when he saw the two Jewish religious people do nothing. So I ask you something. Was it wrong for them to do nothing? If the man was blessed, if the man that did right was the one that showed mercy and the one that performed the action of bounding up his wounds, pouring the oil in the wine, taking him to the inn, putting him on his own animal, taking him to the inn, paying the 200 denarii to the 2 denarii to the innkeeper to take care of him, and then come back to check on him later, which of these individuals did what was right? It's easy to see the Samaritan. So if the one did something right, what about the other two? If the one was right, doesn't that law kind of tell us that the other two must be wrong? If the one did right, the other two must have been wrong. They must have sinned. But they didn't do anything. How can you commit a sin when you do nothing? Is it possible to sin by doing nothing? See, maybe we've spent so much time in our preaching and our teaching of our children and in our churches about all of the things that we're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to do this. We're not supposed to do this. We're not supposed to do this. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And we've browbeat each other to the point that the world looks at us and considers us an egotistical, judgmental people who think they know what they're supposed to do, but yet we don't see them doing, you catch it on? Anything. James 4:17 in the text that Ben read a few moments ago. To the one who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. The Puritans came through, and when they came through to America, they classified sins on two accounts. There are the sins that you commit. These are the actions, the adultery, the fornication, the uncleanliness, the works of the flesh. Those are the things that you commit. Those are the things that you do wrong. That is a sin. But they also added, which God added it beforehand, the sin that we call omission. The sin of not doing, which is just as much a sin as there are any other. You could not look. Jesus, when he talks about this priest, when he talks about this Levite, he can't look at them favorably because they did not do what they were supposed to do. They saw to do good, but they chose not to do it. So I want us to just a few moments to look at some things in an area where we look as a church and we choose to not do something that we should be doing. And when we do that, it's a sin. Because there are several times where we do like the priest and like the Levi. We just walk by the wayside. Seems like I did that a few years ago. We tried an illustration here on a Wednesday night. I think I took like 10 or 12 wads of paper and just threw them out of trash and just threw them out in the auditorium and in the foyer. And I waited. And I waited to see if they were just left there when people came in, or if people would pick them up. Now there was somebody, I think it was John, but John's extra clean. John likes to clean all the time. I think it was John, and maybe somebody else picked up a few of these wads of paper, but there were some that were just left. There were some that were just left in the aisle, some that were left over here on this side of the aisle, and a few that were left in the bathrooms and in the foyer, where people saw the trash, knew they needed to pick it up, but just decided to walk by the way. Now, was it a sin not to pick up the trash? I'm not even going to go there with that. The point is, there are a lot of things that we see that we need to do, but we choose not to do them. And you know why we choose not to do them? Is because it's easy to play defense with our faith. It's easy to play defense and say, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do this. But when the real part of our faith hits the road, is where our faith needs to go on offense. Where it's going about doing things, and sometimes doing those things are very hard and very uncomfortable, and it requires us to get our hands dirty. But we don't want to do them because they make us dirty. The priest walked by, did not help the man who had been beaten, because he didn't want to take the time to do it. He had a job to do. He had places to be. He had things he needed to do. He didn't have time to sit and work with a man and be put out and get dirty from all the blood and then have to take him somewhere and then have to pay somebody to take care of him and set him back on his journey a whole 2 days. The Levite, going on his way to worship, to work in the temple, to do what he's supposed to do in the temple. He saw the man laying there bleeding, almost dying, and he probably said something to the effect, somebody else will come by to take care of it. I've got the Lord's work to do. I don't have time to get my hands dirty and fool with this. Somebody else will fool with it. And if I would be able to ask Jesus, which of these three did right, he would say the same, the one who showed mercy. Does that mean the other two sinned? And I think he would say, yes. But they didn't do anything. That's the point. To them who knoweth to do good, and doeth it not. You know to do right. You know to do good. You're compelled. You see an opportunity and you choose not to do it to him. That's sin. 4 quick ways in how we do that. One way we do that as a church is when we know the needs of an individual and we choose not to help them. If you know somebody has the needs, if you know somebody has a need and that needs to be met, yet we openly choose to not do it, we're just not going to help. Why? Because it's going to require me to do work, or it's going to require me to get my hands dirty. It's going to require my time. It's going to require my wallet. It's going to require me to do all of these things, and I don't like for somebody to ask me to do things when I don't want to do them. Somebody else out there will do it. But that's just not me. That's not my ministry. That's not my job. But how often do we see need? Now, I'm not saying we... Sometimes we have to take a different approach. We have people that come here to the building all the time looking for handouts. Sometimes they are really in need. A lot of times they're not in need, they're trying to take advantage. And we have to be careful of those that we help. And sometimes when we help those that take advantage of us, we're doing them more harm than good than trying to help them spiritually just by giving them money and saying, go off and do whatever you need to do, and they take that money and they buy drugs or they buy alcohol or they use it for other things, when in reality they need the spiritual help. There are times when you see people on the side of the street that you might read their sign, and maybe you're asking, do I help them or do I not? Am I endorsing maybe them doing some sinful behavior or am I not? Here's the point. You see somebody in need, you do what you can to help. If they mess it up, they're responsible, not you. You're doing your best. So if we are to go by somebody in a situation and we know they have a need and we openly deny the fact that we want to help them, we don't want to help them, to Him, it is sin. We can't help everybody, I understand. But if we know to do good and we don't do it, we know there's a need and that need needs to be met, but we choose not. That's sin. That's the first one. The second chance where we have this opportunity, then we fail, is to be gifted. To be gifted from God, to be given a gift from God, and yet you choose not to use it. God has given you a talent. God has given you ability. We look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12. We look at Romans chapter 12. And we go over and over again about how the body works together and how each joint that's supplied, and all of us have a job to do. And God's given us all talents and abilities. And the church can only function to its max potential when all of us are doing and using the gifts that God's given to us. If you have a gift that God has given to you, and yet you choose not to use it, to you, that is sin. That is just as much a sin if you were to go out and to have an affair. That is just as much a sin if you were to go up and rob a gas station. Sin is a sin is a sin. There are no classifications. To be given a gift from God, yet you choose not to use it, that's a sin. Thirdly, to know the truth without telling it. To know the truth without telling it. Now this is one where I have the desire I have right now is to hide behind this podium, because if some of you had tomatoes or something to throw, you would. Because now that's the point that I make, is when I make it, you say, whoa, preacher, now you're meddling in my life. We pay you to do the evangelism. We pay you to do the work. And those of you who have preached, you're doing this right here. You know that's not the truth. We all have a responsibility. And the responsibility we have been given is to share the message of the gospel. And if you've got the message and you know you need to share it, yet you don't, that's sin. That's a good you can do, but you choose not to do it. That's not my gift. That's not my ministry. That's not what I'm supposed to do. We talked this morning a great deal about what it meant to witness. That's all that means, is to share the gospel with somebody. I'm not saying you have to go up to somebody and be able to explain to them what the Greek word means for music, where we sing and make melody in our heart. I'm not asking you to know why our women don't wear veils today. Out there, their head's not covered, and some churches do, and how you have to give an explanation for that. That's not what God is asking all of us to do. He's provided those answers in the Scriptures. He's asking us to share the good news of Jesus, which means how you've been blessed by Jesus. It's as simple as you go to work and you say, God has blessed me so much this week. Let me tell you how good I've been blessed. And you share that. You intrigue, by doing that, you cause them to be intrigued and want to know more about what your life is about with Christ. And the door is already opened. You don't even have to open it. For those opportunities we have to share the truth, yet we choose not to, That's a sin. Ezekiel has a whole chapter on this. If you want to look, and time doesn't permit us tonight, but if you wanted to look at Ezekiel chapter 33, you're going to see that. It's called the Watchman Principle. If the watchman sees people coming to do damage and he doesn't warn the people, whose fault is it? If he knows they're coming and he does nothing, the blood is on his hands. If we know the Lord's going to return and yet we do nothing to share that message with others, that is a sin. So let's look at it this way. Let's say there's a man that has been convicted of a crime. Let's say this man has been convicted of a crime and this man is faced with the death penalty and he is to be executed at midnight tonight. The man is to be executed tonight, but they found something wrong in his case. And they have figured out, the lawyers have figured out that he was not the one who committed the crime, that he's been wrongfully imprisoned. So the governor has given this man a pardon. The governor has given a man a pardon, but you are the person that the governor has handed the pardon to. And it is your job to take the pardon to the prison, to give to the executioners, to know that this man is innocent and he's deserved to be set free and not killed. Let's say that happens. It's a hypothetical situation, yes, but it's my illustration. Okay? The governor has given me this pardon, and it's my job to give it to him. And as I go to give it to him, I get a call on my phone from Larry, who's done this before, and he calls and says, "Hey, Matt, Dillard's has a sale on their dress clothes." I don't know if he's telling me that what I wear doesn't look nice, or if he's just trying to help me out with a good deal. And okay, really? Tonight? Okay, I've got this pardon, but by the time I drive back, they'll be closed. Let me just go in and do a little bit of shopping. And as I go, I'm driving down to say if I'm going to Huntsville to do it, and I'm over here smoking on the boulevard, and I smell it as I go, but man, that smells good. I'd like some ribs. I think I'll stop by and get some. I've got this pardon. I'll have time to do that. And I go and I get the ribs, and I enjoy the ribs. And on my way there, I know I'm running out of gas. So I stop at a gas station. And while I'm at a gas station, I decide I'm just going to sit and have a snack. Maybe get a couple candy bars. And after I do that, I drive and I look, the movies are playing. And I've been wanting to see that movie for a long time. And I know I got to deliver this pardon, but I think I got time to go to this movie. And by the time it's over, the man's been executed. Whose blood, whose hands hold that man's blood? Is it the political system, the law, the government? Is it the governor for not issuing the pardon earlier? No. Who is responsible for that man's death that night? Me. Because I had the message to get him released. But I was preoccupied by my own life, by my own wants, by my own desires. Do you see the parallel with that? If you don't, you're not listening. For those who know they should share the truth, but they don't, that's a sin. And finally, for those who hear the good news and don't obey it, that's a sin. For those people who know the good news of the gospel once it's shared to them and know they need to change and listen to the lessons and see it printed on the page of the Bible that they need to change their life, yet they choose not to obey it, to him, that's sin. So here, as we offer this invitation tonight, as he gets ready to lead this invitation song, you may be sitting in the pew tonight and you may be thinking, I know I need to make my life right tonight. I know I need to respond to the gospel. I have not shared the gospel with others. I have done things that I've passed up opportunities to help those when I just chose not to because I wanted something my own self. If you have that feeling tonight and you say, I know I need to respond, but I'm just not going to you, that's one more sin piled up onto your pile. I'm not being judgmental. I'm stating the fact. If you know you need to change, but you choose not to, that continues to be a sin. So tonight you look at your life. A lot of the teachings of Jesus, to the Pharisees, negative because of what they did wrong and how they lived. But He went beyond that and taught us lessons by doing things, by helping those that needed it, by teaching those that needed it, by sharing His message to those that needed it. That's how He went about doing His ministry, and that's the ministry that He's asked us to do. I've given you a talent, use it. I've given you a message, share it. I've given you a job, do it. And if you don't, it's sin. You have an opportunity tonight to fix it by coming and responding, by being baptized if you haven't been, for the remission of your sins. And if you have, and you've just been living wrong and not doing, you've committed the sin of omission, then here's your opportunity to change as we stand and sing the invitation song.